get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off, all right? And we're going to stand up, and then it's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down, all right? And on the way up, we're going to take your other kneecap, and we're going to get up, and then it's going to take 3 shots to get us down.
And welcome in, Kneecaps Nation. This is the Week 2 edition of Kneecaps for Breakfast. Vince Progar, that's me. Phil Byrne, that's the other guy over there. And I don't know a better way to sum it up than this, Phil. You are 1 out of 7 from the red zone. You are not going to win too many games looking that way. That's before you even start getting into a crucial clock gaffe at the end of the first half, which, let's be frank, Phil, took points off the board.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Without a doubt. Let's get into it. Yeah. So the gaffe reminded me of Pee Wee football. It's something that doesn't happen past the 8th grade year, maybe into freshman football. It's something that it seemed like Jake Bates, still kind of knew it, all of this, kind of ran out of the field. And I think some of the special teamers, at least this is what I saw from my vantage point at the game, we're kind of going on there. There was miscommunication. Doesn't appear the Lions have one of those get back guys that you see in so many college games, so many college teams now. But ultimately, this game is defined by how many points you get at the end of the day, and if you have more than your opponent. What the Lions did so well in 2023, they found 6 instead of 3 when it mattered the most, by scoring when it came into the red zone. That was not apparent today. That was something that is missing, and something that we can touch on a little bit more in this podcast. But it looks like it's a huge reason of what we're seeing right now. This being anemic to scoring touchdowns.
And I don't want to get too deep into the weeds with the decision or not or anything like that, but it seemed to me just at surface level that, and I give Dan Campbell full props for owning up to it and accepting responsibility. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, it is a team game. That isn't what won or lost this game here in week 2, but that almost gave me flashbacks of the Jim Caldwell and the pass back and forth kind of thing, or Jim Schwartz and the challenge flag on Thanksgiving, things that are going to really, really do a number, and that clearly was the case in this game, it seemed like.
Yeah, it just, listen, okay, so I've seen these games in person. From a fan standpoint, you're pumped up. We had our first postseason run in 30 plus years. But to me, I felt uncomfortable. Listen, yes, did I pick them to have a better regular season than you, Vince? But I felt uncomfortable with all the national attention that we were getting. Our podcast is called Kneecaps for Breakfast. We're going to take a kneecap out of you. Aiden Hutchinson, he took a kneecap out of Baker Mayfield. 5 sacks.
He is a boss. I think they officially credited Hutch for 4.5, but he was in on 5.
Yeah.
And he was, in my mind, the lone difference maker in this game for the Lions. He showed up. He ate his Wheaties. And I think he took a step forward into maybe being that next tier of pass rushers in this game.
It's Bosa, Garrett, and him, in my opinion. That's kind of where we're at. And then you kind of find your guys after that. I think those 3 are basically where it's at right now. But here's my problem. I think we have 2 of the best running backs in the game when healthy, and I'm not entirely sure this offensive line is 100% healthy right now. We knew Penei Sewell was dealing with some injuries. They are, in my opinion, the most dominant offensive line in football. And yet, we know the praise that has been crafted towards the passing game, the big contracts that's been handed out, Ben Johnson coming back. And yet, I feel like we want to have the identity be around the passing game. The identity is not around the passing game. The identity is based around how you're going to use Gibbs and Montgomery. The other issue that we have coming into this, and just my opinion of going on for a rant, Vince, you want to stop me? Go ahead. We face the 2 teams starting this season that arguably probably have watched the Lions offense and their offensive tendencies more than any other teams going in there because the Lions ended these two teams' seasons last year. You better believe the defensive coaches have watched that tape from last year 50,000 times and saw when Gibbs was in the backfield, these are the play sheets. When Montgomery is in the backfield, these are the play sheets.
And
When
never
Laporta
one
comes in
to
motion, these are the play
quiet.
sheets.
And never one to be quiet about anything, Phil. Not to cut you off there,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
Baker Mayfield, the always verbose Baker Mayfield, even admitted that this game had an aura of it being personal to him at the very least. And I'm sure he was speaking for his entire team at large.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. First of all, and this is a whole nother wrinkle. I'm kind of getting out all my talking points here out of the way first. Well, we're usually not super reactionary, but there's a couple things that just being at the game that really stuck out that I don't know were transparent through TV or not because I haven't really watched it back yet. But the decision, and I don't know if it was an RPO and he decided to pass. Third down inside your own 10, under a minute to go, and Baker decides to all of a sudden listen. Lions' decision making was terrible in this game, and its own chapter.
Oh, that was a brain fart to the nth degree.
Yeah,
Like if I'm a Tampa Bay fan, what are you doing, dude?
Exactly. And the Lions just didn't have the right recipes in the offensive cookbook today to get anything going from other than JMO a couple looks downfield. But to me, it looked like Baker was trying to make something happen on his own to be like, oh, hey, look, I'm the guy that got the first down, and you get cocky Baker out there doing a first down sign in front of Hutch or something like that. But hey, this game is what it is. It's 1 of 17 that you get. You only get to play it once. Your season does not end tonight, though. This team needs to find its edge, and I'm hoping going into Arizona. I originally, when we did our game by game breakdown, picked Arizona as a loss. But this is where the Lions fans on the road need to show up, get this team to get hyped up, to go into enemy territory, and get back to their bread and butter that led them on that run last year, which was through, in my opinion, the run game. You get the run game going, I think you're going to see more Laporta.
And I called it out in last week's episode and made it a point of emphasis in my talking points was that it seemed like they were obviously trying to force too much in the passing game. And I don't think they got away from that at all. And I feel like they are probably doing a little bit too much to try and assert Jamison Williams as that number 2 guy, even though he did make that nice play in the first half that went for about 50 yards thereabouts. JMO finished with a nice stat line on the day. It still seems to me they're trying to include him in the passing game just a little bit too much at the expense of that running game. And I know that Tampa Bay is traditionally pretty stout against the run. Typically, teams don't have great running days against Tampa Bay. And Todd Bowles, obviously a phenomenal defensive mind, and called a pretty solid, all things considered, defensive game in the week 2 game. However, you lose the main kahuna up the middle in Vita Vea early in the second half. You need to be able to test that a little bit more than twice. I think there were a couple of occasions. I think it was either late in the third quarter or early in the fourth quarter. It was first down, handoff to Montgomery, stuffed. Second down, handoff to Gibbs, stuffed. And then all of a sudden you're behind schedule. It's 3rd and long, and I can't remember what happened after that. But that was the point in time where they pretty much completely abandoned the run game. And it was just throw. And I know you look at the stat sheet, and they more than doubled up Tampa Bay's offensive yard from a yardage standpoint. It was more than double the yardage. It was, I think, double the first downs. They led the TOP by a pretty healthy clip, if my memory serves me right. So you might look at it and say, well, they were down all but 3 minutes of the game. A lot of those yardage was Stat Padford type stuff from yesteryear, but it just seems like they abandoned what they were good at way too early. and maybe it's the equivalent of a quarterback scanning downfield and hearing footsteps in his head a few seconds too early. And maybe the Lions collectively were hearing footsteps a few seconds too early, but it seemed like they got too far away from what they're good at and what allowed them to attain such success a season ago. I want to know, you brought it up, Phil, how the Laporta thing is kind of a byproduct of a successful run game. I
Yeah.
want to know, where is he? Is he okay? He was barely targeted in that Rams game. He didn't even get a throw his way until the second half, and neither one of those were in any type of real leverage situations. In a situation where it's like, okay, you got to go to Laporta here to keep this thing going, and
Yeah.
he's nowhere to be seen. Maybe you can shed a little bit of light on that.
I mean, he's out there. He's out there. He's going, and he's in motion. Brock Wright, I saw him a handful of times throughout the day. They went in a couple two tight end sets.
And I know
I
that
don't know.
the idea was to get St. Brown going today because he was
And he
so
did a little
bottled
bit.
up a week
Yeah.
ago. He had double-digit catches for triple-digit yards. A solid day for Amon-Ra. Battled the injury bug a little bit. It sounds like it
Yeah.
might have just been cramping at some point that may have come back in the very tail end of that game. But it comes back to the same thing, trying to force it to St. Brown too much to get him going, trying to force it to Williams to get him going, where the tight ends were nowhere to be seen. They gave up on the running game too soon, plain and simple. And when you look at the other stuff, like I said, the yardage was good, the TOP was good, the first downs was good. Heck, even they were on third and fourth down, they were about 50%. So it just comes down to finishing, and that usually is a matter of who are you getting involved in these high leverage situations.
So one thing that I would like to see, and I don't know the Lions playbook, obviously, and I am not an offensive coordinator, and I can't tell you what the Lions sets are other than what I'm seeing visually. What I would like to see, though, I think Gibbs and Montgomery are almost elite at what they're really, really good at. But I think there's almost too much of a tell when they are on the field and you only have one of them on the field at the same time. If I don't want to say like you got to line up Gibbs all the time in the slot and you're going to have Montgomery back there or vice versa. But I'd like to see Ben Johnson incorporate more plays in some sort of fashion where you are able to get both on the field. You know what? If one needs a breather, guess what? You got Vaki and Reynolds back there, and maybe they don't have the same skill set. Maybe they're not as good. They can come in for a play or two if they need to. But to me, these two teams that we faced in the last 2 weeks had seen so much tendency. The Lions going into a motion where they've got Laporta and right outside, and then it's going into a two tight end set. They get into a bunch formation. Like, listen, I know Ben Johnson's got a very diverse play sheet, and he's still one of the best minds out there. But I think these two teams just have so much tape and recollection of what beat them last year, and the Lions trying to do the same stuff that they did last year.
So are you implying that this is Ben Johnson's offense was getting a little stale and tired, or are you simply saying that just because of the fact that these two teams that they've played the last couple of weeks have such a fresh taste of the Lions in their mouth, and the Lions offense hasn't been diversified or changed up enough to do anything, that they've learned their lesson over the offseason? What road are you kind of going down with that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a little bit of both. I think these two teams were just very prepared for the Lions, quite honestly. But I think trying to do the same motions, same sets, check downs, you got the same running back there. I think it is a little bit of a tell. I think it is a little bit of a tell of what you're doing. And I would just like to see Ben Johnson incorporate more, because Montgomery and Gibbs are so good. There's got to be some sort of plays that you can get together where you have them both on the field together. Or, hey, you know what? You actually go line up Montgomery out wide. You've got Gibbs back there, but then, somehow you get Montgomery involved or something. Like I would just like to see it shaken up a little bit. Goff, And Laporta, I think their problems are maybe not so much Laporta, just Goff. He's best when he's in a rhythm, and he's made 2 consecutive passes in a row. And I just don't know if the plays that they're calling are super conducive to it, or if teams are just playing like super zone coverage that, then he can't see, and then he's got to sit in the pocket for 5 seconds, and they know he's not going to take off and run, even though he actually did a couple times today to get the first down.
But definitely not a rhythm. I would argue
No.
either of the first 2 games, you never had that thing and where Goff goes off for 3 in a row, 4 in a row, 5 in a row,
Yeah.
and you think in your mind, okay, now we're humming a little bit. I don't think that's happened in either of the first 2 games. And you saw early on, and this is where it kind of gets a little bit interesting because you have Mayfield complete his first 7 passes to Chris Godwin. Godwin has 100 and a quarter by the end of the first.
Yep.
And after that, aside from a couple of nice plays with Mayfield in his own legs, I think he had a nice throw down the middle to Mike Evans there. That was literally all the Buccaneers offense did the entire rest of the day. But that just goes to show you get in that early rhythm and you get some level of confidence there, and it kind of keeps the opposing defense guessing a little bit more. Everybody that is, except Aiden Hutchinson, who it seemed like he was always a half a step ahead of what was going on. Granted, going up against a backup right tackle for Tampa Bay, but there's a lot to be said about the lack of rhythm over the first 2 games for Goff in the offense.
Yeah, and they deferred the kickoff to the second half today, and I know it's just one series, and they want to get the offense going or the defense involved and make the place loud. But I almost think it's more conducive, to get Goff going early and kind of seeing how it goes. So just a couple takeaways that we got there. But hey, listen, Arizona, I would say, doesn't have the same defense that these last 2 teams have, nor do they really have the coaching personnel. I think that either of these teams has. From McVay from an offensive standpoint, and Bowles from a defensive standpoint. So frustrating loss altogether, though. When looking back on this one, Vince, but you do get to try again in a week to right this one.
And let's be honest, in my household, my wife is the pillar of smarts and good ideas and just overall solid wisdom. And I'm the bumbling butthead that isn't always thinking straight. So she eloquently reminded me after the game that I've said this myself over the years, and it took me a minute to remember it. But I've always said that I would rather see the team play like crap and lose as opposed to playing winning football and almost feeling
Yeah.
like it got taken away, like the Dallas game last season. That's a game where the Lions played winning football and the football gods just hit them over the head with a 2x4. This was a game where I did not feel like the Lions played winning football.
No.
And even though the score was close, it was a game where they led all of 3 minutes collectively, and that was it. And even though Tampa Bay didn't look like, aside from those few plays where Mayfield was hitting Godwin time after time after time, they didn't do anything on offense beyond that that really amazed me. They didn't really do anything on defense that really amazed me. The Lions could easily be 2-0, save for a few more well-timed decisions, maybe some less boneheaded decisions at time, and a little bit better execution. But I didn't see winning football played against the Buccaneers in week 2. One thing I want to wrap up before we move on to something else, Phil, was that Daryl Johnston, the analyst on Fox, took more exception to this than I did. He was kind of up in arms about the fact that the Lions were going for, or they were thinking touchdown the whole way at the very end of the game instead of kicking a field goal, kicking the ball off to Tampa Bay with 3 timeouts, trying to get a stop. That way, if you do get that stop, and you get the ball back, then you only need a field goal to win the game. I'm not quite as big on that because it seems to me like the Lions, as often as they go for it on fourth down and try to be the aggressor, I feel like the call was go for that touchdown and go for that kill shot the whole way.
Yeah.
I didn't even think in my mind, hey, kick the field goal and get a little bit closer and let's see what happens, because in my mind, there's just too much that has to go right. Are you okay with how they ended the game as far as playing
Yeah.
touchdown instead of field goal?
Yeah, they went safe and conservative early on with those field goals. I think there were a couple of them. The drives kind of stalled out, quite frankly, but a couple of the Bates field goals weren't super long. That if you were having that aggressive mindset of thinking that you had to go touchdown every single time, that's when you would have done it early on. Absolutely. But where we were, I was confident that uh touchdown was you got to get the lead, because again, you just said it right there. Like, we had the lead for what, 3 minutes in this game. You had to get something to swing back your way if you were going to get the W in the end. Play calls were pretty terrible in my opinion. Some of the execution way worse in my opinion. It just didn't blend together, and like you said, Vince, ultimately they didn't have the winning football element today. I personally think they need to go on the road, get their edge back. That kind of seemed to be a little bit of a spark when they had those road games. And they've just have had everyone love them for so long. They know what kind of environment they get at home. And yeah, they're fired up for it. But like, go into an enemy territory and get that sensation back of feeling like you got your back against the wall. That's what the foundation of all of this was built on. And I don't want to say in week 3 you got to go rediscover and you got to go back to square one or anything, but you got to pull these teams. You got a great rushing attack, and I understand Vita Vea and Todd Bowles, and you can do some things schematically to take that away from the Lions. I don't expect the Cardinals to do it. If you're worried about Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. going off like they did today, guess what you do? You don't let them have the ball. You own up time of possession. You get LaPorta involved. To me, it's an easy game plan that you bring into this one. You got to get some better players involved. I think the Lions just need to visit some things, and they'll be fine.
So week 2, Lions drop a tough one to Tampa Bay at home, 20-16 to fall to 1-1 on the season. And Phil, last words on this. It just seems like the Lions, as much as we've talked about grit since the day Dan Campbell was hired, didn't see a whole lot of grit in this one.
Nope. We did from Hutch, and he had a standout defensive game that honestly we will probably forget about within 2 weeks because it was a loss. And that sucks. And that's something that you really don't, wish, the guy. But, we'll see his sack totals at the end of the year. The way he's doing right now, he's in good shape to be in that contention, so long as he keeps producing for Defensive Player of the Year. It is what it is. We don't care about that as much as we do the wins and losses, and it was, in fact, an L.
It was not, in fact, an L for the Lions' upcoming opponent. Coming up next, the Lions will travel to the desert to take on the Arizona Cardinals for Week 3, a 4:25 Eastern Time kickoff on Fox. And you could argue that this was a letdown spot all along for the LA Rams after having to go all the way across the country to play a tough game. We knew it was going to be a tough game against Detroit, losing in overtime the way they did, and then having to go on the road in division. I would argue that that was a letdown spot all along, given the fact that they have as many injuries for the Rams as they do. But that game wasn't close for a minute. It was all Cardinals 41-10 over the Rams. If passer rating is your thing, Kyler Murray had a perfect passer rating on the day at 158.3, had a great first half with Marvin Harrison Jr., 4 catches, 130 yards, and a couple of touchdowns. And that was all in the first half. And at that point, they sort of let off the gas a little bit and just let the running game take it from there. And the Cardinals, who is not a team that really opens up a lot of eyes as far as their run game is concerned, led by James Conner, hard to believe he's still around, but he's still
Mhm.
still kicking 230 yards rushing against the Rams. So that was an all-around stomping by
Mhm.
the Cardinals. Is this something that you think the Lions need to be concerned about running into this all of a sudden offensive buzzsaw? Because let's not forget, Phil, they were right there until the very end on the road against Buffalo in week one. Do you think maybe the Cardinals, with a healthy Kyler Murray and a standout weapon in Marvin Harrison Jr., may have a little something cooking down there offensively?
Potentially, yeah. But it goes back to one of the things that Aaron Glenn, this defense has always struggled with, in my opinion. You saw it a little bit today with Baker, is the running quarterback. Kyler among the best in the game at it, and he is going to extend drives. He is going to extend plays. Um, Alex Anzalone left today's game with a concussion. You got to get him back. He's done a terrific job here as of late, the last really going back to around the half season point of being able to contain these quarterbacks from running the ball quite a bit. You need all the guys that you can get to zero in on Kyler because he is slippery. He will escape and he will get those first downs. That's really what I'm a little bit more worried about. The Cardinals' weapons from a receiver standpoint outside of Harrison Jr. Doesn't really scare me. It's kind of run of the mill guys. It's um, they're good, but I think based on what we've seen the last 2 weeks, these two teams have much better receiving cores than the Cardinals. So to me, it goes back to just the tried and true. Can you contain Kyler into the pocket and actually just kind of go back to a more traditional offense for what they would have? And if you can do that, I think you got a pretty good chance out there.
And if what you say is true, Phil, about how week one against the Rams and week two against the Buccaneers being rematches of the playoffs from this past season, it's almost like the NFL, in a sense, set you up for what we've seen, where you get a couple of teams coming in that are a little bit too familiar with what you do. Now you're playing a team out of division who you have not seen in a handful of years, ever since I think the last time they played was early on in the Campbell regime, where the Lions kind of stole
Yeah.
that one at Ford Field late in the year because the Cardinals just straight up didn't even try. They
Cliff
admitted to
Kingsbury.
after the fact. Yeah, exactly. The latter Cliff Kingsbury years.
Yeah.
Now, so there's not the level of familiarity on either side. So it's almost like you can expect two teams to just kind of drop the gloves and just get a good old fashioned fight in. You're not going to be having the home field advantage necessarily because the Cardinals don't have a strong advantage at home. I can't really think that there are many Cardinal fans anywhere in the United States, much less in the greater Glendale, Arizona metroplex. So you might see some Honolulu blue and silver in the stands down there at State Farm Stadium. We'll just have to wait and see. But in any case, Phil, that's a game that the Lions should, on paper, win. Even
Yeah.
though the Buccaneers game was also a win, they should, on paper, have won, but they did not. NFL games are not won on paper, but we know that games have the higher likelihood of being a one score game. I would say 75% of the games that take place on a given NFL week are all decided by one score. So, what's going to be the key to the Lions making sure they're on the right side of that one score and shaking off what happened in the Buccaneers game?
No, it's a couple things that we've talked about so far. For me, I think this begins and ends with the Lions running game. Have that be your attack. Take the time of possession and take the air out of the ball for the Cardinals, where they're, you know, just not going to be that explosive, or at least limit the explosiveness that they can. By doing that, hopefully you can get Laporta involved a little bit to keep Goff kind of under center a little bit. You're going to get him a little bit more to work with. Think about Tim Patrick as well. We saw him a little bit here today. First little taste of action. I'm not expecting a 1,000-yard campaign from Tim Patrick or anything like that, but you are looking for him to basically fill that Josh Reynolds void. And that's another piece that we haven't had this year, right? So that's kind of my key to the game. We'll have to see where Amon-Ra St. Brown's health is at. And then obviously from a defensive standpoint, if you can limit what Kyler does rushing the ball, I will take my chances with him passing. As he is shorter, he still struggles seeing over his linemen a little bit. There will be tip ball opportunities. You get a guy like Hutch with that long span that he's got. He should be able to tip some of these passes, when Kyler's trying to go back and pass.
Remember way back in our days of doing radio, Phil, when you'd have the worked in production elements and the sounders and everything like that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
If only we could have some production elements going here. It's time for your power stat of the game, brought to you by Vince Brogar's mouth.
Oh, yeah.
Here is your power stat, Phil. And take it with a grain of salt because it's a new season and anything that's happened in the past is essentially null and void. We're moving forward in 2024 and that's it. But it has been 23 months, so almost 2 years since the Lions have dropped back-to-back games. So they are undefeated after a loss since October of 2022. So if you value that, that means that you value the Lions coaching staff's ability to regroup the guys, draw up a different game plan instead of trying to continue to bang your head against a wall and hope that something different appears right in front of you.
Yeah.
And a good response for the players as well to learn from what they did the previous game, figure out what didn't work, and try to overcome things accordingly. So they have that going for them.
I like that stat. And this is where I would then play like a Peter Griffin drop or something like that. We had a bunch of Peter Griffin drops from what I remember on our little college radio station producing board that we had,
Yeah, life was a heck of a lot different a decade and a half ago, that's for sure.
Yeah.
What's also different is the perception of the Minnesota Vikings changing gears a little bit. We kind of thought that Minnesota was going to be a shoo-in to be picking somewhere in the top 5 in the 2025 NFL draft. Don't look now, Phil, but the Minnesota Vikings, at the moment, we try and speak as much in present tense as possible because you're listening to this on Monday. So this is a Monday morning podcast. So we don't like to necessarily refer to things as today's game because you're not listening to this podcast the same day of the Lions. But for full transparency, we're recording this Sunday night to be dropped on Monday. The Bears and the Texans on Sunday night is currently in progress. So at the time of taping, we don't know how that game's going to shake out. So as of right now, Phil, the Vikings are alone at the top of the NFC North with a 2-0 record, including that 97-yard pass play from Sam Darnold to Justin Jefferson, and that wound up being the difference against a hungry and a little bit banged up 49ers squad. But, well, boy, watch out for those Vikings at 2-0.
I would say we'll see them fall back, and you wouldn't know it from today's game with how all over the place Jared Goff was, but Darnold had the talent coming out, at college, and he got into a bad situation with the Jets, bounced around a little bit.
Bad
there
situation
was always
with the Panthers
there, and sometimes it takes just going to a team that maybe not even the core is good, but just like the basis of the organization is better than the team that drafted you, and the Vikings are pretty steady, they've always been a pretty competitive team. So for Darnold, I mean, he's probably having the time of his life throwing to some of these receivers, he's got out there. So don't count them out. I would say they're probably still a long shot to keep this up, but we'll see them at some point here. But yeah, they had their passing game moving today.
This is going off topic here, Phil, but do you remember a few years back during that opening Jets Lions game? That was the first Monday night game, and then they had a second game of the doubleheader. It was the I think the Chargers and the Broncos, and they had Sergio Dip as the sideline guy. They did one hit over the course of that game, and Vance Joseph is having the time of his life. So when you said that phrase, that brought me back to the Sergio Dip reset from about 6 years ago.
Well, speaking of which, in ESPN, Sam Darnold in the Jets jersey, that graphic where he's just like throwing the football around, and it'd be like concussion, COVID, left injury, and it was just like a sign of doom and gloom, But yeah, no, he looks like he's in a much healthier spot with the Vikings now for sure.
No doubt about it. No, we didn't know what we were going to expect from the Green Bay Packers in their game against the Indianapolis Colts. Their first game back on U.S. soil of the 2024 season after playing the Eagles in Brazil. They lost their quarterback, Jordan Love. In comes Malik Willis, of all people, to be the backup. And it seemed like Matt LaFleur and the offensive staff put this game plan together absolutely perfectly in that they didn't ask Willis to do too much through the air. They only threw the ball maybe 8 times the whole day. They made the throws that he did make count. He really didn't make mistakes. He made a couple of plays with his legs, but beyond that, it was Josh Jacobs in the running game that really salted that game away and made the Packers the aggressor early and often in that one, in a game that was never really in doubt until maybe Indianapolis made a late score to make it look a little bit closer than it actually was. But looked like it was all Packers in that one, and the whole no Jordan Love, the Packers are going to keep losing thing never really came to fruition, at least in this game.
Yeah, well, I mean, think we've always known that Matt LaFleur is one of the more talented play callers in the league, and he knew what he had with Malik Willis and would have to rely upon Josh Jacobs, and they certainly did. So for all those people out there that are like, oh my God, think about if Jared Goff went down with Hendon Hooker. Well, I'm here to tell you that Hendon Hooker is better than Malik Willis. So if the Packers, as offensive limited as they may be with Malik Willis, they're able to get it done. Something more positive would be able to happen, I would believe. But they're 1-1, and we'll see what happens with them down the line too.
You're listening to this episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast. Vince Progar, that's me. Phil Byrne, that's that guy. Happy to have you along with us for our post-Week 2 edition. Lions drop a tough one to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 20-16. 1-1 through 2 games. And if you think that Lions going 2-0 is something that happens relatively often, that's not necessarily the case. The Lions have not entered Week 3 with a 2-0 record since 2017. So it has been a minute since it's happened. I know a lot of people out there were thinking that 2-0 was a sure thing, but it's the NFL and things happen. So we, like you said, Phil, live to fight another day as the Lions take on the Cardinals in Arizona for Week 3. Phil, one thing I want to have a conversation with you while we have a few minutes here involves a young man who some people thought the Lions should have drafted in the top 10 just a few years back when things were a little volatile about the long-term vision of the quarterback position for this franchise, and that's Tua Tagovailoa. And it's been pretty well covered over the sports news and even the general news at that. His injury history, particularly his history of concussions, seems to be rearing its ugly head once again, as in the game this past Thursday night against the Bills. It was a game where the Bills were already winning pretty handily. Tua had already thrown 3 interceptions on the night, and it was a game where you kind of just want to get out from underneath it. And same thing with the Lions, live to fight another day. And he sustained his 4th concussion in the last 2 years. Oddly enough, he had a pretty darn injury-free, by his standards, 2023 campaign, but the injury bug back again once again this year. Didn't look good from TV. I'm sure it didn't look any better live in person either. And we're almost at a point now, Phil, and I'll let you take it from here, where it's almost a situation of, should this guy even take the field in a football uniform ever again for his own well-being.
It's really, really scary to see. Anytime you get a concussion, you know, the symptoms now. They go in the tent. With Tua, it's different though. He plays quarterback, and obviously, a lot of the rules that the NFL has implemented they've been in place to try to prevent situations like this, where you have a quarterback, a figure of the community, in many situations, in many teams, the star of the team, kind of keep going through this and removing those big shots to the helmet, that they would get, and he can't get away from this. I don't want to like go ahead and just say one way or the other that here's my take on it and it's the only take, and this, that, and the other thing. He is free to live his life how he wants to live his life. If I was in the Miami Dolphins organization, I would let him sit this one out for the rest of the season. And then if this happens again, here's a check. Please retire. Please take care of yourself. You've been paid. But this is more like he is so young, and you see so many bad cases of CTE or people who unfortunately lose their lives or things like that. When they hit 40, when they hit 45, when they hit 50, like they don't get to live the back half of their life, that so many people should be expected, especially when you make the money that some of these folks do and have some great medical and other benefits that the lifestyle will entail. So my personal belief is that he should sit out the rest of the year and just let him evaluate what he wants to do next. So it could be retire. And if he wants to retire, guess what, Dolphins? You wrote him that check. You should have known this was something that could come into play. And, I would hope that Stephen Ross, can cut that check in full, and you just don't have a weird injury settlement, situation waiting on his hands if he wants to leave and walk out the door. But, he's got a family. He's a father. No kid, especially a young kid, deserves to have their dad just be, unfortunately, like a crippled mess, by the time they hit 30. So that's kind of my take on it. The Dolphins, I'm sure there are a solid amount of guys that can go in there and still play with the receivers that they have. And hey, maybe they won't go to win the division, with the way that the Bills have started, but they can still be competitive, with some of the guys that are out there. And McDaniel's still good at play caller that they should happen. But it is incredibly scary. This once again happens with Tua, and he just can't get away from this,
We know so much more about concussions than we used to. And things always used to be, oh, you just got your bell rung, rub some dirt on it. Or you had Monday Night Countdown that did the jacked up segment right before kickoff. Right. And those hard hits were glorified. We know so much more now about concussions to know that they are brain injuries, plain and simple.
Mm-hmm.
And the studies show that a guy who gets a concussion is more likely to get a second one. And if you get a second, you're more than likely to get a third and a fourth. So we already kind of know that Tua is up against it here at number 4. I don't know how many it was for Steve Young before he finally called it a career, or for Troy Aikman before he called it a career. A big differentiating factor between those two guys and Tua is that those guys had a little bit more in the way of hardware, the Super Bowl victories. Tua, by and large, has accomplished nothing as an NFL quarterback. So to that end, it seems to me, not being in Tua's head, but just trying to get a grip of what I think is going through his mind. He's a competitor. He's worked his entire life to get to this point, and this is why, in a big way, I'm sure he believes he was put on this earth not only to be a husband and a father, but to also be an NFL quarterback. And to walk away from your dream job before you've reached the mountaintop because of situations that were not in your control is a scenario that I think would be very hard for him to come to grips with, whether it's the right decision or not. That seems like that would be a very difficult, if not impossible, decision for him to make. My gut tells me that he's going to take some time away, and it may be a situation where the Dolphins come to him and say, this doesn't look good. The outlook for the future isn't good with what we know about concussions and CTE and future implications and what have you. They may very well say, hey, if you walk away, then you've got a 90 to $100 million check coming your way and it'll be set for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
But if he says, you know what, I'm not okay with just walking away because who knows, maybe nothing will ever happen, and then I'll be living with the what if factor for the rest of my life. But if he kind of ignores the powers that be in the medical field's advice and decides to run it back again and just see what happens and something bad happens, he may
Yeah.
be out a whole lot of money if that's the case. I'm not entirely familiar with how that all works,
Yeah.
but that could be a double whammy if down the road he chooses to come back, which is he's entirely in his own right to do so, but it may not be quite as simple as he gets paid on the back end for the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where you get complicated, like what was written into his contract. Obviously, we know what he was paid, but we haven't seen a copy of the contract. We don't know what's in there. We don't know, if there's any sort of provisions or anything. So you're 100% right, So anyways, wish him all the best. Incredibly scary seeing this happen again. Um, yeah. So hopefully he can, you know, just at least here temporarily before, without any playing decision or opinion on it, just get back to, feeling good again.
Yep, absolutely. Well wishes go down to his way, no doubt about that. All right, Phil, we've been kind of in more of a somber mood over the course of this episode, breaking down
Yeah.
the Lions loss and the Tua injury and everything like that. Not a whole lot of happy stuff. And it wasn't really much better recapping the game picks from last week. I went 2-3 based on the game picks, and you went 1-4.
Oh
I
boy.
think I think we
Oof.
both got bamboozled by the upstart Buffalo Bills. I don't think
Yep.
either of us saw that coming. And I definitely don't think either of us saw that New Orleans Saints is the 25-year reincarnation of the greatest show on turf. I mean, they're a wrecking ball machine out there on offense, having absolutely bombed the Dallas Cowboys in week 2 after dropping a hammer on the Carolina Panthers in week 1. So let's try and flip the script on both sides and see if you and I can be on the right side of things. We'll start off with the Thursday night football game this week. The New England Patriots, having been only a overtime field goal away from possibly being 2-0 on this season, they are catching 6.5 as they travel to the Meadowlands to take on the New York Jets. So the Patriots at 1-1, Phil, the Jets at 1-1. Who you got?
From a atmosphere and ecosystem and playing with house money standpoint, I like the Patriots. No, hey, just reminder, we're going with who we want as the win and loss, not against the spread on this.
No,
correct?
we're going against the spread.
Oh, against the spread.
Yeah, it's more fun that way.
Okay, yeah. Then I'll take the Pats all day. Then I'll take the spread on that.
Yeah,
I think the Jets look like incredibly overrated right now, and they don't have good direction. So I'll take the Pats.
Yeah, and it seems to me like the Jets always seem to underperform at home,
Yeah.
and I don't know what the situation is, but anytime they're in the friendly confines of MetLife Stadium, even though we all know full well they're a sub lessee of the New York Giants for that complex, but that's a whole different discussion. I do
Yeah.
think that the Patriots are going to keep this one within a touchdown, and it's going to be kind of like a little bit of Gerard Mayo grit action going on there within the Patriots organization. I think Patriots will take that
Hey,
6.5 and say thank you very much.
hey, Jets, go build your own stadium. The LA Clippers finally built their own place this year. I know Steve Ballmer is like one of the wealthiest people in the world to be able to afford that, but
I don't think the
what do
Johnson
you?
brothers are doing that bad either, though, Phil. Let's be honest.
Yeah, they like people that I don't like though, but so I'm not fans. But anyways, that's my non-political statement. We're not going down that rabbit hole.
Amen, brother. So, speaking of somebody who is 2-0 on the season, Jim Harbaugh and
Yeah.
the Los Angeles Chargers. They are road dogs as they travel to face the also surprising 2-0 Pittsburgh Steelers. So, Chargers plus 2.5 at Pittsburgh for week 3. Your thoughts?
Chargers haven't had a ton of explosive plays on that offense. They've done just enough. Johnston getting involved today in the passing game, in the game that we saw. Um, Steelers defense pretty solid. I think I will take the Chargers in this one. That is a pretty close call on this one, though.
And I think it's going to be a close game. I think the Steelers can keep this thing to within a possession, but I think the Steelers defense has been exceeding expectations the first two
Mm-hmm.
games of the season. I think they'll get to Justin Herbert early and often. I think Jim Harbaugh's got the right idea down there, but in a tight game, I think the Steelers will be able to take this one. The surprising New Orleans Saints and the Philadelphia Eagles will be doing battle. Eagles minus 2.5 at the New Orleans Saints. So somebody's going to be picking up a loss between those
Mm-hmm.
two, Phil. Is it the 2.5 point favorite Eagles or is it the home team, the Saints?
I'm gonna go with the Eagles on this one. I probably will regret this because the Saints defy all space-time continuum logic, and somehow Kamara and Carr look like they're about 8 years younger than they really are right now. But I think top to bottom, I think the Eagles just have way more talent. Um, they haven't looked like they've given up yet on the season or anything, and I think they can just get this done even on the road.
I think the Eagles are in a tough spot with the Monday night game against a possibly tough Falcons team, and then they got to go on the road to play a team that nobody's been able to stop them so far. And granted,
Yeah.
one of those teams was the Panthers, but even so, I think the Eagles would be in a tough one. Anytime you're laying points on the road, that's always tough. So I'm going to go with the Saints in this one. Houston Texans, as we said, they are at the time of taping, they are currently in battle with the Chicago Bears. So can't really tell you what their record is going to be when they go into their game at the Vikings. The Texans are laying 3.5 as they travel to Minneapolis to take on the 2-0 Minnesota Vikings. So, Phil, will it be the Vikings finish in week 3 at 3-0, or do you think the Houston Texans will be able to go on the road and get this thing done?
So normally I wouldn't want to lead too much into the injury report and how we're feeling on this one. But Justin Jefferson is the best receiver in the game right now, and he was a little shaken up getting out of the game today. Give me the Texans. I think they will outscore anything that a Howell Jefferson can lead on the Vikings offense. Again, still really haven't hit it out of that running game either. I think you got to be a little balanced if you're going to take care of the Texans.
And I'm with you there, Phil. I usually, as I said, I don't like to lay points on the road, but I think that Houston is building a machine down
Mm-hmm.
there with D'Amico Ryans in his second year. They are built to go on the road. You have Stephon Diggs coming back to Minneapolis where he got his career started. And I think they're a team that's on a mission, and who knows, they may be looking to go 3-0 themselves, depending on how the game against the Bears shakes out. I like the Texans on the road. Last game of our pick segment, Phil, the Ravens catching a point as they travel to Jerry's World to take on the Cowboys. Both the Ravens and the Cowboys losers in week 2, so they're both looking to get off the schneid. Which side do you like in this one?
I will take the Cowboys in this one. I think they're going to get a bounce back, and Bengals didn't look so hot today. We know the Browns kind of had that anemic offense going. Steelers doing enough defensively again still. So I think even at 0-3, the Ravens won't be out of it by my shakes, but I think the Cowboys are going to get this done.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. Usually the offense looks pretty solid at home. We didn't really see that in the game against the Saints, but we do know that Mike Zimmer is a solid defensive coordinator, and I imagine that he's going to have his guys regroup between week 2 and week 3 and have an answer for the Ravens. And surprisingly enough, they'll send the Ravens to an 0-3 record. That would be something.
Wouldn't it be? Pretty wild.
Well, that's all the time we have for you on this episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast. Hopefully we have some good news at our next episode, and hopefully that includes a Lions win over the Arizona Cardinals. All that and more coming up in our episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast next week. For Phil Byrne across the way, Vince Progar saying good morning, go Lions, forward down the field, over and out.